overgivers often overgive because we feel like that's what we have to do to earn our place, or in my case, more like make up for being too much. So I've got to pay you extra for having to deal with me. But when you're clear who you are, when you know what your identity is, you know where you belong and that you belong because of who you are, not because you've given them extra and they're therefore allowing you to belong. Hi, I'm Barb Nangle. I want to welcome you to my podcast, Fragmented to Whole Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery, where I help people heal their emotional, psychological, and spiritual wounds and make deep, lasting changes in their lives. I'm a boundaries coach who specializes in helping women who say yes when they really want to say no, and who neglect themselves because they're so focused on others. I've coached hundreds of people to create Boundaries by Design, a blueprint for life. I have a free boundary building starter kit at boundariesstarterkit.com. On this podcast, I share my experience, strength, and hope from recovery. I don't support or endorse any particular 12-step recovery fellowship, and I don't claim to speak for any 12-step fellowship. I don't believe that 12-step recovery is the only way to recover. You might need additional help. I'm an avid beachcomber and a formerly closeted fan of the Hallmark Channel, especially the Christmas movies. I wear fingerless gloves almost all year round because my hands are always cold. And I love taking pictures of license plates with my initials BN on them. My hope is that you'll find my words concretely helpful in improving your life, whether you're in recovery or not. If you like what you've heard on this episode, please screenshot it and share it on your social media. Be sure to tag me at Higher Power Coaching. This is episode 288, Overgiving No More, Part 2, How Boundaries Restore Balance and Energize Your Life. This is part 2 of a 2-part series, so if you didn't listen to episode 287, you might want to go back and listen to that. Even if you don't, you're still going to get good stuff out of this. Now, in that episode, I shared that there are 4 patterns common among overgivers, and they are misplaced outer focus, excessive independence, self-imposed limitations, and ineffective communication. Learning how to change those patterns from the inside out can be accomplished by building healthy boundaries, which is the topic of this week's episode. I'll be sharing what boundaries are, why we need them, when and where to set them, and of course, how do we actually set and uphold them. So let's start with what boundaries are. The way that I think of boundaries is that they are standards you have for your life, hopefully that you live up to. They're limits that you set for yourself and limits you set for other people so that you can uphold the standards of your life. You're basically letting people know this is how you can expect to interact with me. Sometimes we do this with words by telling them things. Other times, we just show them by the way we behave, like not responding to work emails over the weekend. That lets people know she doesn't do work email over the weekend. I'll use the example of having standards for your health to illustrate how this equates to boundaries you have and limits you might set for yourself and others. Now, I have certain standards for my health now because I have abused and neglected myself, and I don't want to do that anymore. And I really want to take good care of myself. So I have limits for myself to maintain my standards of health. One example is that I go to bed by 11:30 every night. I don't stay up until all hours of the night watching Netflix the way I used to. Another limit is that I personally eat 3 meals and 2 snacks a day. I happen to be in recovery for compulsive overeating. So those limits help me to stay abstinent in my food program. And it's the same for me every day. I also weigh or measure my food for that same reason. So those are examples of limits for me. And then limits for other people might be things like I don't allow people to smoke in my home because I want to maintain a healthy household. Okay, so now let's talk about why do boundaries matter? Why do we need boundaries? Boundaries are about identity and belonging. If you don't know what you like, what's okay and not okay with you, if you don't know what you prefer because you're constantly saying yes to things that you don't want to do, or you're a chameleon, then you don't really know where you end and other people begin. In other words, you don't know your real identity or the boundaries of you. And if you don't know what your identity is, how can you possibly know where you belong? I used to be a chameleon, and I was very proud of that fact because I could fit in anywhere. But the reality is, I wasn't really sure where I fit in because I didn't know. Do I actually fit in here? Or are they letting me in because I'm an overgiver and they want what I'm bringing with me? Overgivers often overgive because we feel like that's what we have to do to earn our place, or in my case, more like make up for being too much. So I've got to like pay you extra for having to deal with me. But when you're clear who you are, when you know what your identity is, you know where you belong and that you belong because of who you are, not because you've given them extra and they're therefore allowing you to belong. Boundaries also matter because they define what we are responsible for and what we are not responsible for. For example, we're responsible for our own feelings and not other people's feelings. We're responsible for our hopes and dreams and not other people's hopes and dreams. We're responsible for fulfilling the duties of our own job description, not the duties on others' job descriptions. And boundaries matter because they allow us to gain control over our lives. When we don't have healthy boundaries, we feel like we're being bandied around by people, the world, the universe. But when we set boundaries, we've made decisions about how we want to live our lives. We decide what are the standards that we want for our lives, and then we go about living our lives in such a way that we live up to those standards. All right, now on to where and when to set boundaries. The way you know where and when to set boundaries is by what matters to you. You know what your boundaries are by what's important to you. So you're going to set them in places and at times that matter to you. You'll come to know your limits as you discern what's important to you, which is a big part of the boundary building process, getting to know what is important to me, what do I like and not like. The way I coach my clients is I have them go through an exercise to determine their top 5 values. Then they use those values as guideposts for their lives. Those guideposts steer them toward behaviors that are going to promote, support, and uphold their values. And it's really helpful if you determine these things ahead of time. If you're clear on what matters to you, you don't have to put a lot of thought into it as you're going through your life. When an opportunity comes up to promote and support that value, you'll know that's a yes. And if an opportunity comes up that's going to detract from that value, you'll have a lot more clarity on that's going to be a no. And if an opportunity comes up that has nothing to do with any of your values, you can take a moment and evaluate it and ask, like, do I have the time and energy and interest in doing it? It's a lot easier to make those judgments when you're clear on what matters to you, on what your values are. Okay, now here's the big one. People want to know, now that I'm starting to understand what boundaries are, why I need them, and when and where to set them, how the fuck do I do it? Now, remember, it starts with knowing where your limits are. We're back at the beginning. And what are the standards you have for your life? So you know what limits to put in place and you know the standards based on what matters to you. So if you're going to put limits on other people, that means you're going to set a boundary with them. And that means you have to decide ahead of time what you're going to do if they cross your limit or your boundary. What will you do if they don't honor it? Many people think they can just tell people, this is my boundary, and then the other people will be like, oh, okay, and they'll conform. In other words, they think if I just state my boundary, I'll be able to control other people's behavior. Well, that's not a thing. Your boundaries are about you and for you. They're about what you will do or not do. They're not about other people. They're about you teaching other people how to treat you. Now, we are always teaching people how to treat us. Much of the time, we're teaching them, treat me the same as you always have. But when we start building boundaries with people that we know, we're reteaching them how to treat us. It could happen that you set a boundary with someone and they say, oh, okay, and just honor the boundary. In fact, it does happen, but it often doesn't happen that way. Also, especially when you're new at it, and especially if you're surrounded with people that you've been overgiving to and they're used to you accommodating them. So you have to decide, what will I do if they don't honor my boundaries? Another way to say that is, what is the consequence I will provide if they don't honor my boundary? How will I change my behavior if they don't honor my boundary? Because it's my boundary and it's for me, not against other people. So you have to decide what that consequence is going to be, and then you have to actually follow through on it. So back to the example above, where I don't allow smoking in my house. A consequence for someone who violates my boundary could be that I ask them to leave or I ask them to smoke outside. But if I say there's no smoking in my house and somebody lights up and I do nothing, then that wasn't really a boundary, because real boundaries have consequences. If I haven't given them any kind of consequence for lighting up, I basically told them, I am not a woman of my word, don't trust me, and that wasn't really a boundary. The way I used to handle something like that before I had healthy boundaries is I would have said, hey, there's no smoking in my house. And then if they smoked, I would have made that on them and their problem. I probably would have been pissed off, maybe bitched about them behind their back. That is not a boundary. It's a real boundary when you actually follow through on some kind of consequence. So here are some pointers for communicating your boundaries and consequences with people. Make sure you are directly communicating to the person that's involved. You also want to make sure you're very clearly communicating your message, that you're not wishy-washy about it. It's abundantly clear what you're trying to say. For example, Natasha, I asked you not to smoke in my house. Please step outside. So direct and clear communication. You also want to make sure you focus on the behavior of the person, not the person. You're not going to berate or disparage the person or go into character assassination or say, what the fuck is the matter with you? Instead, focus on the behavior, not the person. Now, I know that I've given you a lot in a short period of time, and if you want much more detail on this stuff, you can get it in my free boundary building starter kit. It's at boundariesstarterkit.com. You can also get much more through my coaching programs, which are on my website, higherpowercc.com. But feel free to email me with any questions that came up from listening to this. I'm at barb@higherpowercc.com. You're feeling overwhelmed because you're overcommitted and just can't keep up. You neglect yourself even though you know you should take better care of yourself, but you just don't have the time. You really want to say no, but just can't get yourself to do it because you don't want to come across as selfish or unhelpful. And you're pretending things are okay with you when they're really not. If this is you, we should talk. Go to barbchat.net and sign up for a free 30-minute call with me about my private coaching. This is for people who are finally ready to make deep, lasting changes in their lives, their relationship patterns, including their relationships with themselves, their partners, family, friends, and colleagues. That's barbchat.net. If you like this podcast, and I'm guessing you did because you're still listening, you will also love my weekly newsletter, Friday Fragments, which has short essays similar to the podcast. You can check it out at fridayfragments.news. That's fridayfragments.news. If you haven't already subscribed to my podcast on your favorite podcast outlet, please do that. It helps carry the message to more people. I started this podcast because there was so much wisdom in recovery that just wasn't making its way out into the world. So I want as many people as possible to hear it. I'd also love it if you'd leave a 5-star rating or a review, which you can do on Apple Podcasts. It helps other people find it so they can get the benefits that you've gotten from listening. If someone in particular came to mind when you listen to this episode, please share it with them. And my favorite place to hang out on social media is Instagram. I'm at Higher Power Coaching. Please DM me there. I'd love to hear what you got from this episode. I run private and group coaching programs on building healthy boundaries. Whether you need help with boundaries in your personal, professional, or romantic life, I can help. Head on over to barbchat.net where you can get on my calendar for a free 30-minute Better Boundaries consultation. I also do short-term situational coaching to help people make it through specific situations they're going through, such as divorce, empty nesting, preparing for retirement, or any phase where their identity is shifting. Regardless of the type of coaching, my ideal client is someone who is ripe for change. If that's you, I'd love to work with you. My goal with all my work is to help you make lasting changes in your life, like I've made deep, lasting changes in my life. Remember, it's never too late to recover. No one is beyond hope, and healing is possible. Thanks for listening.